to human history. The term history in this presentation will always refer to human history. So we have the Higher Purpose Forum has this presentation on American history. It's called Providence and Race in America, which I give, and it is very extensive. It has 8 sections, and the first section is called Providential Orientation. And that kind of sets the framework for the rest of the content, which takes us right through US history. And I've noticed when I teach this, that people struggle with the idea of providential history. I don't think it was that foreign a viewpoint 30 years ago, but it seems like it's out of favor. So I decided I should take time in our first meeting here. I'm hoping that we might present this series during our Boston Higher Purpose Forum sessions. And so I thought it might be a good idea to talk about what are theories of history and what is the providential theory of history. So that's what today's topic is about. It's a background on what is providential orientation. So there's 3 parts, and I hope we'll go through these quickly. Background on theories of history, 4 approaches to understanding history, and then the providential perspective. And we'll have a brief discussion after section 2, and then at the end of section 3. There's a lot going on in our history. Here's recent events, protest events at my alma mater, Columbia University, that was front page news. And it's a very confusing set of issues that are raised in these demonstrations. And they very, very much, to really understand them, I think you need sort of a theory of history. How do these events and the issues in Israel and Palestine fit into my view about where history is going? To me, you need to have some kind of an orientation to understand what the meaning of these events. This is particularly true because a lot of people, and I am one of them, feel this is a transitional or axial time in history. Now, I think probably people of every age have thought that they're living in an axial age. I happen to think that this is an axial age. So therefore, the events of our time have long-term significance. But just following events really isn't enough. These events and facts that we observe, like the announcement, I think Trump was just found guilty of. Isn't that right, Luke?
That's right.
He was found guilty. Okay. So it's good to be able to place this news in an historical context. These events need to be interpreted using a framework. So I would say that a philosophy or a theory of history is like having a compass, which helps us understand where we are in history and where we're going. And there are 2 basic approaches to understanding history. There are secular viewpoints, and there are sacred or providential viewpoints. Secular viewpoints very much focus on the material forces that are at work shaping history. They pay attention to economic, political, social, cultural, intellectual factors. So when I studied US history, it was all about economic development of our country, and it was all about big leaders. Those are the 2 things that approach to history focused on: economic development of our country and big, great male leaders. And secular historical theory is very much rooted in the life cycle of civilizations and the impact of great men. This is a common theme you find throughout secular theories of history. It's very important also to appreciate that secular theories and philosophies of history go in and out of favor. They do not maintain relevance for very long. So the way people think of history right now will probably be very irrelevant 30 or 40 years from now. People will no longer be thinking about history according to their secular viewpoint that they might be holding on to now. The alternative way of thinking about human history is the providential or secular viewpoint. Very different orientation. This is the idea that transcendent spiritual forces are behind the unfolding of the purpose of human history. And it is a fact that major religions far and away outlive civilizations. And the basic principles of providential history are very simple and they sort of don't change. It is that sort of God is directing human history, and there's some basis of interaction between God and humankind in seeing how history progresses forward. But this way of thinking about history is thoroughly discredited in academia. So when the secular theorists begin to delve into the importance of religion in human history, they lose credibility. That's exactly what has happened to Arnold Toynbee, in fact. But the fact is that the birth of Jesus is the axis around which the world organizes time and history. You know, we mark our calendars based upon a sacred event in history. So there is a reference point. This most central reference point in history is a religious event. So this basically the two worldviews of history. The materialist worldview especially this is based upon the Marxist worldview, is that the economy, the means of production, and the nature of production relations is the base of any society, and that base is what creates or determines the superstructure. The economy is what determines the nature of art, culture, religion, philosophy, politics. They are all a function of the nature of the economic base. And the purpose of the superstructure is to maintain the strength of the economic base of the society at that time. So human history is the history of the development of economic relationships. That's the materialistic worldview, especially under the Marxist view of historical materialism. The sacred worldview of history, or the providential worldview, says that underlying in human history is spirituality and religion, where people identify a sense of identity of themselves, their tribe, their nation. They derive their sense of values and norms and meaning and purpose. And this is what underlies culture and what creates culture and cultural expression. And cultural expression gives rise to the economy, to economic relations, and economic relations determine the political structure. So if you look at the Marxist view and the providential worldview, you'll see that the top two boxes here, economics and politics, are the same. The providential worldview would agree that economics is fundamental to politics, but before economics, upstream of economics is culture, and upstream of culture is religion. So these are two very different ways of thinking about the forces behind history. And I would argue that secular views of history come to understand very well certain features of history. It's like the analogy of blind people going up to an elephant and trying to figure out what it is. And they identify one part of the elephant, and they characterize the elephant by saying, oh, it's a rope, it's a tree, it's a snake, it's a spear. They have a part of the truth, but they can't understand the entire magnitude of the being in this analogy of the elephant. So secular views of history do make a contribution, but in a very limited way that doesn't stay in favor very long. So the early sacred view of history, we would say this most pronounced is that of Augustine. He was a Catholic scholar, and another very pronounced, more recent expression of academic expression of sacred history was from a French Catholic priest, Jacques Benet Bousseau. On the secular side, of course, the earliest ideas of history that I know about come from Aristotle, but in more recent times, we have some very important contributions made by George Hegel, who developed a teleological view of history, Thomas Carlyle, who developed the great man theory, Karl Marx, dialectical materialism, and Oswald Spengler and Arnold Toynbee, who had a cyclical theory of history. So we're going to talk today about Hegel, Carlyle, Marx, and Toynbee. And then we'll talk about the providential view of history and compare and contrast that with the secular views. So let's dig into a few. We're going to look very superficial look at 4 secular viewpoints of human history. And the first is Georg Hegel, an amazing German philosopher who I studied when I was in college. Very, very hard to read. But he definitely thought that he had figured out what history is all about. And he had a teleological view. In other words, history is pursuing a specific purpose, and it is making progress towards that purpose. Hegel's was a theory of history based upon what's called the phenomenology of Geist. What is Geist? Geist is collective spirit. It is everything in the universe apart from the created universe, apart from nature. So basically, my understanding is it includes the collective soul of the human race, and it includes God. We know that the biblical understanding is that God created human beings in his image. So the collective soul of Geist is a combination of all the spirituality in the universe. I know it's a very abstract concept, but it's like Geist has a life or a spirit, and history is the progressive self-realization of this absolute Geist, or of God, based upon the lawful unfolding of freedom and rationality, and that Geist is developed and makes progress when there are gains and advances in knowledge through the products of culture and the advance of religion and philosophy and academics, that history gradually progresses towards the realization of Geist, or of God's nature. So this was a breathtaking, path-breaking theory when he first wrote about it. It's idealistic, it's teleological, and it has a forward-looking purpose to it. It's eschatological, meaning that it has an endpoint, an envisioned endpoint when the phenomenology of Geist is fully realized, and it is utopian. And very interesting, it's very deeply based upon the number 3, which to unification is a fascinating aspect of this ideology. It's very tied. People think it's all about dialectical material, about the dialectic, but it's more about the number 3. Hegel's philosophy broadly influenced scholarship across Europe for about 100 years. So here's an interesting quote from, 2 quotes from Hegel that'll give us a better feel for his view. We stand at the gates of an important epoch, a time of ferment, when spirit, or Geist, when spirit moves forward in a leap, transcends its previous shape, and takes on a new one. A new phase of the spirit is preparing itself. Philosophy especially has to welcome its experience, its appearance, and acknowledge it, while others who oppose it impotently cling to the past. So this is a very forward-looking, progressive view of what's happening in history. It's developing all the time. And here's a quote about his view about about America. America is therefore the land of the future, where in the ages that lie before us, the burden of the world's history shall reveal itself. Our second theory of history is much simpler. It's the great man theory, which was originally written about by Thomas Carlyle, had a lot of influence in Europe for a long time. Carlyle explained that the world is the background setting for great men, exceptional traits possessed at birth, destined individuals to become heroic leaders. Great men will become world changers regardless of the setting they are born into. It's not history that creates men, it's great men who create history. The advances or changes in history are determined by exceptional men. This is the opposite of what Hegel thinks. Hegel thinks that great leaders just uncover the force of history that's already underway. But Carlyle believes that great men create history. They're the cause of history, not the effect. So they have, Carlyle has 6 hero types, and some of his heroes that he writes about: Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, Genghis Khan, Alexander the Great, Martin Luther, Shakespeare, Rousseau. This was a widely held viewpoint in the 19th century, influencing textbooks and encyclopedias, but it's now largely regarded as faulty because it's non-empirical, and most theorists of history believe that the strength of the institutions of modern states and media overwhelm the significance of individual influencers on human history. But it remained this idea about the significance of great men, I believe, is of continued importance because it continues to be upheld in populist media and culture and politics. People are enamored with great men and think that they have great impact on human history. I think it's an absolute theory. Here's a quote from Thomas Carlyle. History of the world is but the biography of great men. Our third theory of history is from Karl Marx. This theory is well known, dialectical materialism. He believed that society consists of a base, which we talked about, production relations, and a superstructure, which is everything else that's the effect of the underlying production relations. History passes through progressive economic stages en route to classless communism. Progress from one stage to the next occurs through class or dialectical struggle. The key to historical progress under capitalism is the emergence of a militant proletarian class. So this is a theory of history based upon progressive class struggle, dialectical struggle. This is clearly the most impactful philosophical theory there's ever been in human history. It's had a huge effect on European history for the last 200 years, since the 1850s, let's say. The intention of historical materialism was really, a polemic, and the purpose of it was written specifically to incite a violent overthrow of class relations. But the theory was largely discredited by events in the 20th century, specifically the events of World War I discredited historical materialism because the working class in Western Europe did not do what Marxist theory predicted it would do. They fought in wars of nationalism rather than fighting a class struggle. They turned in their credentials as workers and became national. They joined nationalist armies, which was really a shock to the communist parties of Western Europe that the workers behaved in the way they did. And a militant proletarian class has never really emerged in any capitalist society. So instead, there was other theories to create the overthrow, specifically Leninism and Maoism, but those were not grassroots proletarian revolts. Here's an interesting quote from Karl Marx. In the social production which men carry on, they enter into definite relations that are indispensable and independent of their will. These relations of production correspond to a definite stage of development of their material powers of production. The sum total of these relations of production constitutes the economic structure of society, the real foundation on which rise legal and political superstructures, and to which correspond definite forms of social consciousness. The mode of production in material life determines the great general character of the social, political, and spiritual processes of life. That is the materialist view of society. And you can see at the bottom here, his theory of history saw a gradual progressive based upon dialectical struggle from the slave society to feudal society to capitalist society to socialist society, and finally the eschatological goal of history is to achieve a classless communist society. And our last view of history, before we'll have a little discussion, is cyclical theory. There's two scholars who are the best two scholars, or most well-known two scholars of the cyclical theory of history is Oswald Spengler, a German philosopher, not very well known, but constantly referred to in academia, still referred to, and Arnold Toynbee, a British historian who passed away in the 70s. And we'll talk today about Arnold Toynbee. He wrote a theory of history, 12 volumes, Those 12 volumes are a 7,000-page study. It's the largest, I believe it's the largest study ever written in the English language. And it is a review of all of the civilizations throughout human history. His view, Arnold Toynbee view, is that civilizations are the basic actor in human history. And they are governed, civilizations are governed by discernible forces. Civilizations follow a life cycle: genesis, growth, maturity, decline, and disintegration. And he acknowledges the crucial role in each of these societies that gets beyond genesis and goes into growth of a creative, entrepreneurial minority, and the importance of mimesis, which is that the broader population begins to imitate and benefit from the excellence of this creative minority. That's the way that a civilization goes from a genesis into growth and then maturity. History has seen the emergence of 21 to 26 civilizations. 5 remain alive. No civilization has avoided disintegration, which is sort of a cultural suicide. But that doesn't mean that every civilization is doomed to disintegrate. He does believe that the transfiguration of a civilization is possible. But both Spengler and Toynbee regard Western civilization as being in decline. Interest in Arnold Toynbee's theory peaked in the 1950s, and he became discredited in academia because of his growing emphasis in life. As the further he went in his studies and the completion of his scholarship, the more and more his theories began to center on the importance of Christianity. So he kind of went out of favor in Western academia. Here's an interesting quote from Arnold Toynbee. When in history, the history of any society, a creative minority degenerates into a dominant minority, which attempts to retain by force a position that it has ceased to merit, this change in the character of the ruling element provokes, on the other side, the succession of a proletariat, which no longer admires and imitates its rulers and revolts against its servitude. So here's the cycle of civilization that he wrote about. He showed that all the civilizations he studied went through this process of genesis, growth, time of troubles, universal state, and disintegration, or, if possible, transfiguration, or kind of the rebirth or reawakening of the civilization. But the periods of time of troubles, universal state, and disintegration, these are all aspects of civilization decline. And Toynbee believes that Western civilization is now in a process of decline, but will not necessarily disintegrate. In conclusion about Toynbee, I'll read this section I found in Britannica. In the study, that's the name of his book, his series, his 12-volume series. In the study, Toynbee examined the rise and fall of 26 civilizations in the course of human history, and he concluded that they rose by responding successfully to challenges under the leadership of creative minorities composed of elite leaders. Civilizations declined when their leaders stopped responding creatively, and the civilizations then sank owing to the sins of nationalism, militarism, and the tyranny of a despotic minority. Unlike Spengler in his Decline of the West, Toynbee did not regard the death of a civilization as inevitable, for it may or may not continue to respond to successive challenges. Unlike Karl Marx, he saw history as shaped by spiritual, not economic forces. So that's the end of part 1. Part 2, and I think, Lou, this might be a good time to see if there's those who'd like to comment or share their opinion or raise a question.
Yes, this presentation has been very enlightening so far. So I'm turning to the chat now, and of course, if you would like to give a verbal comment, please raise your hand, and then I will call on you. There was a comment, a question in the chat asking, what does proletarian mean exactly, according to Marx? Mr. Edgerly, do you have any comments about that?
Well, that's a good question. We're familiar with that term because that's a very, very important term in Marxist philosophy. The proletarian class was the working class. I don't really know the answer to the question. I would guess it's a class of people that become politically activated by current social and economic conditions and become an influence in opposition to the political power of the day. And according to Arnold Toynbee, the civilizations are threatened both by an internal proletariat, which are people who no longer are confident in the political leadership of the elite class, and civilizations are also challenged by external proletariat. Those are external forces that want to see the demise of that civilization. So they face pressure from two proletarian sources. That's about what I can tell you. Maybe Sun Yun could contribute to that.
Yes, I see his hand raised, and then after his comment, we will go to Irina Schneider.
I had a separate question. You can do Irina first. She was raised her hand ahead of me.
Sure.
Well, as a person who studied Marx extensively and read
Irina's from Russia, so she knows all about this.
Yes. I remember the quotes that proletariat are those who have nothing to lose but their chains, right? The people who work, but they do not have, of course, they do not share in the profit, or they do not own their means of production, right? And because they have nothing to lose, the only way to fight for life and prosperity is to destroy those who exploit them.
Yes, to organize like a political party and then act on the system. Yeah.
Yes.
So very interesting. I want to make one more comment. Oh my God, I just forgot what I wanted to say. I'll say it later. Okay, Sanhyun, go.
All right. So in one of your earlier slides, you had the providential view of history, where it's religion, culture, economics, and politics, superstructure. My question is, are there or could there theoretically be secular religions that stand upstream of culture and influence it?
You mean, yeah. Yeah, because secular philosophies, whatever, they do affect people's sense of identity, their values, their sense of norms. So yes, I think that the idea of a religion doesn't necessarily mean it has to be, it could be a secular ideology or a secular viewpoint, I believe. That would be my opinion. As the same underlying influence on culture, which then influences economics and politics. Yes.
Yes, that's a very important point. And just quickly back to the question of proletariat, I agree with Aunt Irina and Uncle Jim that the proletariat are those who, as I put it in the chat, do not own capital, or in other words, do not own the means of production. And yes. Did you have another comment, Irina, Aunt Irina?
Yeah, it's very interesting.
She's my auntie figure, so.
That in America you studied Carlyle and the understanding that the history was created by all these great men. According to Marx and maybe Lenin is more, great men have no role in the society. The history is moved by masses, and whatever is on the top doesn't matter, because there are more deeper laws behind the history, and it will move there anyway, despite who is in charge. That's very interesting, I thought. I
Yes.
think and as you said, that theory, Carlyle's theory, is kind of outdated. I think my understanding, which was connected to Marx, is outdated. Like, I think now
But Irina,
opposite.
it's so interesting to me. I hear on the news people say, if Trump is elected, it's the end of human freedom in America. That's the big man theory of history. They think that one man who they don't like, one man who is going to be able to destroy history. To me, that is just so far from the truth. But that's that kind of mindset about history. I don't buy it. But anyways, so I agree. That's why it should be obsoleted, because people put too much stock in the influence of big men. I sort of feel the same as Marx or Hegel, that history has a force behind it, and individual men can contribute to it, but they can't take control of it.
Because my mind changed the opposite way. I started thinking that, yes, like people like Jesus and Muhammad changed history so much. And without them, if they were failed or didn't appear, the history would be so different. Or Confucius, right? Look at the, yeah. I think now more like Carlyle, I guess. At least I'm in the middle between Marx and Carlyle. Thank you. Sorry.
I see a comment. We need great women now. Amen.
Yes. So in order to continue the presentation, we can have one last comment. I see one more hand raised, and that'll be our final comment or question until the end of the presentation, where we will have further discussion.
Okay, so this is a question. You said, why? Okay, here's the question. Why is Hegel's theory labeled as secular in your slide deck? The way that you expressed it, it actually seems very spiritual, almost religious, the way you described it.
Well, if you go back to see my original layout of the sacred and secular theories, Hegel kind of crossed right across both of them. Did you notice that, Sun Young? It actually crossed. It incorporated both the secular and the sacred. But I don't think he thinks in terms of providence. I could be wrong, but I don't think he has what we would call a providential. He thought that society went from the family stage to civil society to the state, and that the state, a politically organized state, will be the end product of human history. And he thought that human history was going to culminate in Prussia. He was so impressed with the conditions of Prussia in his age that he believed that there would be a political state that would be the culmination or the eschatological event in human history. That's a kind of a secular viewpoint of where history is headed. If I understand him correctly, it's, Hegel is really a hard guy to really understand, but I find him very inspiring, and I know for a fact that he felt his writing was inspired by God. He wrote that from my pen come the words of God. That's what he wrote. That's what he wrote. So,
a bold statement, indeed.
Yeah, he was very inspired. His theory was he felt inspired in what he wrote. Yeah. So he probably
And I would
is.
also. Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, I would also add that one reason why people consider him a very secular philosopher is that his dialect of abstract, what was the second one? I forget what it was called. I even wrote it down. It's commonly referred to as thesis, antithesis, and synthesis.
Yes.
But what Hegel wrote specifically was abstract, determinate, and absolute. It's very similar to the Marxist dialect, where the capitalist society is negated by the proletariat elements, and the remaining productivity gives rise to the socialist society. And to conclude this discussion, Bruce Edgerly wrote, "Weren't the Bolsheviks workers who rebelled against the Russian Tsar state, refusing to no longer fight for nationalist reasons in World War I, but instead for Marxist class struggles in the Russian Revolution?" And that's a question. In this sense, class warfare did in fact materialize.
Well,
Yeah,
there was
Russia left the war, right? Or the Russian Empire stopped fighting in the war.
That's right. They basically quit fighting. Yeah.
and they had a civil war.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was
Yeah.
about class struggle.
I would say that was about, there's different opinions, but Irina, wouldn't you say that the Bolshevik side, which was a minority party, was, it wasn't a spontaneous uprising of workers. It was a political, it was run by a group of political elites who kind of radicalized a party of intellectuals, and they became the vanguard party of that uprising.
Well, correct. Of course, they were leading it, right? But still, they managed to persuade the masses that the fight in the war is just capitalist fight of rich people who will win. On other sides, right? It doesn't matter. Rich people will always win. So there is no point to die for them. And Russia left the war. Lenin signed the agreement that, forget it, we are leaving.
And they just disengaged from that struggle.
Right. And Germany also had revolution, right, at that time. For a while, the German workers took over.
2 weeks.
Yeah, but they did. They didn't want to fight either.
But they fought in a war. They fought in a patriotic war rather than a class uprising. And that revolution lasted 2 weeks.
Was Marx's idea that workers from across state boundaries would unite, like they would consider themselves part of one group, regardless of nationality?
Yes, it was called the First International, and they were organizing the proletarian party of the world. Yes, to see
And that's
themselves
how
as
the
all.
Soviet Union later lived, right? We, of course, I was a child, but it was always supporting those who were fighting against their dictators, against their whatever, for the socialist way of life, right? Resources were spent in Africa and South America to support workers. How did they make people be so poor, right? We were always believing that it's okay, it's difficult, but we are helping those who are in need. And
I'm having
fight.
internet problems.
You know, we can survive. That people believed in it. People believed in it.
Yeah.
I can show you the book. I can bring next Sunday. I have PTO gave us gifts for the first grade students, and it's written on them, I wish you study hard because, and have a lot of success, because you are a lucky one who will live in communism, in a communist society. People believed that they didn't write it just because.
So Irina, would you believe with Bruce's point? You agree with Bruce's point that the
Yeah, I agree with Bruce. Yeah, it worked.
Thank you.
At least they could persuade it.
Alrighty.
Those educated people persuaded masses, whoever followed them, that it's possible, that it's correct, not to hate each other on national boundaries.
I see. Good.
Yes. Thank you so much for that discussion. Just so you know, my camera is off due to internet connection problems. So please forgive me for that. This was a great discussion session. I think we're very glad we inserted it where we did. So now we're going to continue our presentation, focusing on the providential perspective.
All right.
And we'll have some more discussion after.
Thanks, Luke. Okay. Part 3, the providential perspective. All right. I want to talk about a bridge here. This is a bridge in Florida called the Sanibel Causeway. Here's a picture of the Sanibel Causeway as it operated up until, I think, 2022, the fall of 2022, fulfilling its purpose of allowing cars to go from the mainland of Florida out to Sanibel Island. It got hit by Hurricane Ian in September of 2022, and it was destroyed, and it became what we would call into a fallen state, unable to fulfill its purpose. It was destroyed. It could no longer function normally. The state had to decide what to do, whether to abandon it or just let it sit there, or destroy it, blow it up, or rebuild it. And they made the choice to restore the bridge back to its original condition. They repaired the destruction over just a few months under Governor DeSantis. They eliminated the brokenness of the bridge, and they allowed the bridge to be recreated back into its original image. It's as the original engineers designed it, so it could continue to go back and fulfill its original purpose. So there's 4 phases in this story. There's the original design of the bridge, there's the fallen condition, there's the process of restoration or renovation or recreation, and then there's the return to the original functionality of the bridge. So this is sort of an analogy of the way providential history is understood. There's an original condition as God originally intended. Then something took place in history that caused a fall or a fallen condition of contradiction and dysfunction in the world. And that since that time, there's been a gradual process underway of restoration, an attempt to restore the world back to its originally intended condition. And eventually, that in history, eventually, sometime in the future, the kind of kingdom of God or whatever would be restored back to the original design which God had always intended. The idea is that if God is an omnipotent or perfect being, then his purpose will be accomplished. But it's been prolonged in its fulfillment, delayed. So you have this idea of there was the beginning of a restoration process, and we are living in human history, which is the story of human history is a story of restoration, reversing the failures, and eventually history will reach its fulfillment as originally intended by God when the creation was initially established. So we're living in a history of restoration. And we exist, our time right now is somewhere along this process, this restoration process. We're living in the middle. The bridge is part way renovated. So in the Old Testament starts with the story of a family, Noah or Abraham and the wife and the children, and then we see that it gradually manifested into 12 tribes, and then an entire people was created, and then a nation was built, and it gets broader and deeper and wider, this current of human history, this restoration effort. And we would say that at this point, the process of restoration has progressed and is now the mainstream current of human history. So here's kind of a quick summary of a restorational or providential viewpoint of history over 6,000 years, although the first 2,000 years in this scheme is what we call biblical years. It was probably much more than 2,000 years, but the Bible has it as 2,000 years. But there's a 2,000-year period up until the time of Abraham, in which a family, Abraham's family, became the founding family or the first family of a group of families and then tribes that grew into 12 tribes under Jacob, and they established a nation. And then at the given time, a Messiah was sent to that nation, and a new phase of history began called Christianity. And now the Christian cultural sphere is by far and away the largest cultural sphere on earth. It's the largest religion on earth. It's become the mainstream culture in the world. So this is it's all been, it's not to say that this is going smoothly or as let's say God or the engineer intended, but this is the way to understand human history, as this process, the gradual unfolding of a providential story in human history, going from the family level to the national level and now to the worldwide level. And we would see that, in fact, the process of human civilization, human history does pass, as Arnold Toynbee explained, through great civilizations. The first providential civilization being in the Tigris-Euphrates area. The second one, the Greek and Roman civilizations, the Mediterranean. Then moving westward. These are always moving westward to the European civilization, and then more recently, in the recent period, moving further west to the next civilization, which was Pax Romana, let's say, or the American century. And now historians believe, certainly unificationists believe, that the next civilization phase is emerging, and this is being called the Pacific Rim era, the fifth sequence of civilizations in providential history, the Pacific Rim area, which is just now becoming visible, or now becoming in ascension, in ascent. So here's this idea of restoration, and Christian historians, and certainly unificationism, does believe that the United States has a very central role as a Christian nation, as a nation founded. Americans' founding is actually complicated. It does have a contradiction in it, but it was initially founded by one of the two sort of wombs of America is a Puritan womb, and it's based upon our Declaration of Independence. Was very revolutionary at the time, and it envisioned a kind of civilization that had not been envisioned before, a place of where a government for the people, of the, well, that's kind of Civil War language, but a government based upon the consensus of we, the people, in which all men were created based upon their inalienable rights given to them by their creator. It's an imperfect history, but it's a history of a country that has very central providential importance. That's why I give this talk called Race and Providence in America, to try to explain historical providence in our country since its inception. So, Luke, that concludes the third part here on the restorational perspective, on a very simple overview of the providential viewpoint on human history, concluding there with an explanation about the central role of the United States in that providential story. And I assume we'll now go into our final discussion. We have a few minutes left, but I want to thank everyone for their kind listening. Thank you.
Alrighty, thank you. Let's give a round of applause for an amazing presentation. And with a cliffhanger. It's funny because I can't stand cliffhangers, but I've heard bits and pieces of it before, so I'm not too upset. Thank you for that presentation.
The cliffhanger being the provincial story of the U.S., you mean?
That's right.
Yeah, that's a long cliffhanger. It's pretty...
Very long cliffhanger.
Yeah.
It's a good, we're in the pilot episode.
Yeah.
Yes. So yes, like Jim Edgerly said, we can now go into our discussion portion. We would like to end no later than 8:15. That's once again, 8:15 is our cutoff where we will end the meeting. So that leaves us about 19 minutes for discussion. Beginning with the chat, I see that Sun Hyung posted, very interesting, foreign policy specialists talk about the pivot to Asia. And he followed up by saying, starting with the Obama administration. One point that I would like to, I guess, open up the floor with is the fact that the Hegelian dialect, it's used by both the Marxist materialist view of history as well as actually the providential view of history in a different form, rather than negating itself to achieve a higher being, a society, or a world. It is, in the providential perspective, I found that its opposite elements create unity rather than a negation where one element is completely cut out. And it's not just the providential perspective or Marxist or Hegelian that uses this type of dialect. For example, you have the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who talks about the transvaluation of values and how, of course, coming from a perspective of suspicion regarding Christian values and virtue, but even he has some sort of a similar dialect where it's the you start out as like a slave essentially, or enslaved morality, doing the will of the masters, but then you rebel against them, and rather than obeying the prevailing morality, you become immoral. But then to go beyond that is to be, at least in his view, an amoral being, or he compares it to like a child, where both the morality of the higher class and the lower class are destroyed in favor of in his case, amoral, because he doesn't really define values. But I just find it very interesting how that dialect is in similar forms in both views of history.
Well,
Dialectic, I'm sorry.
dialectic, yeah. Toynbee refers to the same. He calls it challenge and response. He uses that term, that societies become civilizations when they face a very difficult challenge and they respond to it in a creative, innovative way that's never been attempted before, and that becomes the basis for the success of the civilization. It's a very dialectical concept that civilizations become great by overcoming, by a struggle, overcoming a challenge. It's a very similar dynamic as what you're talking about in the dialectic. And that's, again, Toynbee. Civil societies that don't go through a challenge and response crisis don't become civilizations, according to him. Who don't go through a dialectical process don't mature into civilizations.
Wow, that's insightful. It's almost like a principle of history that is universal, is a civilization or society needs to grow beyond its current self. And I feel that's a universal principle because it's true of the individual. If history is the progression of groups of individuals, then if it happens within the individual, it should happen within the civilization.
Well, you sound like a Hegelian.
Well, his dialectic is all over, so we're all more Hegelian than we may think.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I had a question, and if anybody else has a question, feel free to raise your hand. So it seems to me human nature, we're always rebalancing our expectations. And so that means we always want to be growing. We always want to be in a growth mindset. And if we're stagnating, staying the same, then we're actually unhappy. So it seems to me that these theories of history that have a particular final destination where it's like you arrive and then it's done, I don't think human beings would ever be happy. Like history would not stop there because human beings would try to change it. If things stagnate for long enough, people will even make their lives worse just to have a change.
They become stagnant.
Right. So, so I'm very, I take it with a big grain of salt, any theory where it says, oh, this is the final destination point. So with that said, what about the providential theory of history which you presented, it seems like this original state is like a final destination point. How would that avoid the problem of like stagnation?
Well, that's a that's a kind of hard to articulate because none of us have ever been there before, right? We haven't lived in that consciousness so that we know how it would work. But if the idea of the eschatology is to achieve some kind of end of alienation, spiritual alienation, and achieve a harmonious relationship with God, then we can imagine that the world would continue to be creative and dynamic and flourish because that's an infinite source of inspiration and love. So I think that in the we'd have to work on this. We'll have to develop this, Sun Young. But I would think that the eschatology of providential history is that it's an end to alienation, the beginning. So that's why the diagram went to restoration, and then it went upwards towards fulfillment, because once you reach the end of alienation, then you can begin to live a normal life of normal, healthy spiritual life. I think that's the beginning of normality.
I think Nietzsche puts it very well, although I don't agree with many of the things he talks about. But one thing I do agree with is he acknowledges that after you transcend yourself or you transcend the current morality, he doesn't know, like Nietzsche doesn't know what it's going to look like. He doesn't know what the new value structure of morality, or what he calls like the new person, or the Übermensch, as he calls it. He even acknowledges that there's something beyond that. And that's kind of how I think of what you're talking about. It's almost like just a new beginning. It's like a child, as Nietzsche puts it. You don't know what it looks like, but you know it's something higher than what we got. And that's what everyone's hoping for, it looks like. But I would agree with both of you that, yeah, history, to say that there's an end all be all, it doesn't make sense.
No.
Alrighty. Moving on to Bruce Edgerly's question in the chat. He wrote, "What are you suggesting is now being restored in the world by the US? What was the original state we're going back to?"
I guess that's directed at me because I'm the guy that gave the talk, right?
Right.
Yes, but if anyone else has an insight, I'm sure.
My theory about the United States is that this is going to take a few sentences here, but very simply, that human migration occurred over 99% of human history. We've been separated into separate tribes. There's basically three macro tribes. There's the Asian tribe, the European tribe, and the African tribe. And they were isolated for 60,000 years, and they are very, very, very different from one another. We don't appreciate the challenge we're facing when we try to integrate people from different. We're trying to heal, not heal, but overcome 60,000 years of differentiation. And the country where that is being undertaken en masse, institutionally, intentionally, is the United States of America. That's why I picked that quote from George Hegel, that the burdens of history have to be resolved by the United States. So my view is that America is the country of tribal integration, and it's very, very hard to do. We're dealing with differences that accrued over 60,000 years of human migration. And the first time those tribes came together en masse to create one country, E pluribus unum, was on this continent, the New World, where tribal integration was attempted for the first time. And we're a city on the hill trying to accomplish the unity of diversity in our country, unlike any other. So it's a very different mission than other countries. It's not meant to be like Europe. It's something new. It's a new world. So that's I hope that wasn't didn't take too much time for that. That's my view about what we're trying to do here in this country. Did that make any sense?
Yeah, but do you think that was something that's being done by design, you know, like it's like kind of part of this spiritual progression, or is it just more materialistic where, well, airline travel is a lot easier now and people can move around a lot easier, and this is the first country that happened to be timed just right for that kind of mass migration to happen?
Well, I think both of those are true, but I think that the initial start of it happened at the very beginning of our country. The country was populated by Asians, and then the Europeans and Africans arrived at the exact same time. So this country started out with 3 tribes. Those are the founding tribes of our country, and they all, in my view, are all the founding tribes of our country. But I think the other explanation you provide, let's say the materialistic explanation, is also true. That's been augmented by the advances of civilization. And it's become more and more relevant that we get this right, because the whole world is now dealing with these issues that we're meant to accomplish. And I believe the United States is way, way behind schedule in this, about 180 years behind schedule. I could explain why I think that, but we're trying to do something and we're struggling badly, and people are frustrated and tired by it. But I think perhaps both of those explanations would be true, but I do believe that it was intended from the beginning.
By
Yes.
whom?
By the person who created the tribes and created humankind, God. So that's the idea of providential history, that this country has a providential purpose that is relevant to God's historical purpose. So it's not just chance or economic forces, it's beyond that. That's my view, my providential view.
Gotcha.
All right. So we're approaching the end of the call. So our last 2 comments/questions will be from Sun-Hyung Miller and then on to Rena.
So this is a comment, but or maybe a question. I guess the question is, how does God influence history? And the answer that I have is that God influences history through human beings primarily, by people get inspired. And I think usually people who get inspired, they put in a lot of work first to prepare themselves, their character, their mind, their heart, and then they tap into something, right? And then they can help move things forward. But then also those people can also lose their inspiration and hold on to power for too long. They lost their, history has moved on and they're kind of like stuck where they were. What do you think about that? How does God move history in your opinion?
Well, that's the great man theory. There's some truth to it, isn't there? So I believe Hegel was inspired. In his consciousness, he was filled with inspiration. As an example, or Jesus Christ, the guy was filled with spiritual power that directed him, according to what we call his original mind, to treat people the way he did, because he was guided. So, I mean, I don't know if that's the answer, but people do, of course, people do fail. We believe in this, in unification believes in human responsibility, that an individual like Moses might be given guidance, but he might fail. And if he fails, he will no longer be a central person in history. He'll be kind of left behind. Is that what you're saying, Sun-Hyung? That people may succeed or fail in their responsibility?
Yes. Yeah. I don't know if it's responsibility, what I was saying, but like because responsibility implies that it's like laid upon you by the external force. but yeah, they lose touch with their inspiration, or they lose touch with what's right.
Do you
The one
believe
thing,
that? Go ahead.
well, you said, what I said was similar to great man theory. I don't think it's just these great historical figures who get inspired. I think everybody can get inspired, and whatever their little slice of the world is, whether it's their town or their profession, they
Right.
can move it forward and be that important person in their slice of the world.
We can all be great men.
Right. Be the change you want to see in the world.
Absolutely. But I mean, I do believe that Abraham Lincoln, if you read what he went through and all the confusion he sorted out and the way he influenced people and the importance the steel conviction he had that this country was not going to be divided, and the way he spoke in his second inaugural address and the way he spoke at Gettysburg, to me, that is a man who is inspired. He's not just autonomous. There's more to it than that. And he changed history. He didn't change history, in my opinion, because he was a great man. He was a great man because he allowed himself to be inspired. And when he was filled with that inspiration, he acted on it and he took responsibility. To me, that's what made him a great man. I don't want to just, but I mean, I think Martin Luther was another great man. If you read his speeches, they are electric, aren't they? They are incredible. Read a letter from a Birmingham jail. You can't read that letter and stay seated. It is.
I agree.
Yeah. There's more to it than just a great man, in my opinion. I don't know if we got carried away there, but.
No, it's okay. But
Got
let's give
inspired.
time for our yes. Let's give time for our last comment / question from Aunt Irina.
I guess it's more a comment. I look around, it's only maybe Mr. Sugajima can agree or disagree with me. I think America is a really special country. Coming from outside, maybe because you live in it, it's a little bit theoretical. You breathe here differently. We have a lot of problems, of course, but here people are solving these problems. They're moving forward all the time. When I go back, and though I love Russia very much, you kind of go into the same thinking. We are on our own, and maybe Japan on their own, right? But in America, it's like in your face, everybody together. We have problems, we solve them. We have conflicts, we try to understand how to decide to figure them out. I think it is like a great country with a lot of, for the world, it's like a training ground. I don't know. If we make it here in America, the whole world will follow,
benefit. Yeah.
right? If we fail, oh my God, the world will be trying to solve it in their little places somehow.
Isn't that, Irina, why freedom of speech and freedom of conscience is so, so important?
Yeah, just imagine that this constitution was written. I don't know, of course, I didn't live at that time, but it seems like out of the blue. Everywhere there were these empires and people lived according to this whatever narrow understanding of monarchy and supreme power, and suddenly you're right, like, wow, people are equal. Whether it was practiced or not, it was maybe idealistic to think it's possible immediately to practice it. But still, it was written down and people agreed and put their signatures under this.
And they
That
took
all
it
people are
seriously.
created equal. They have the right to be happy. That's amazing.
Take that from a Russian.
Yeah.
Such a hopeful way to end the call. We are the hope, this
Thanks,
country.
Irina.
Yes, thank you, Aunt Irina. Thank you, Mr. Edgerly. Thank you to everyone who participated and was listening to both the presentations and also engaging in the discussion. The team will evaluate the past few months, and as soon as we know what steps we're going to take next, we will send out emails and posts to let everyone know. But in the meantime, we'd like to invite everyone to the next collaboration between HJI Graduate School and the Higher Purpose Forum on June 6th from 7 to 8 p.m. on the topic of understanding the Catholic view on social justice. So we'd like to invite you to that event. It will be held via Zoom. If you are subscribed to the Higher Purpose Forum email list, you should have received an email. If not, definitely feel free to contact a member of the team, or specifically Jim Edgerly.
Also,
And
if
with
you'd like to see Sun Hyung's talk on Is America in Decline, and the second one he gave was called on immigration, go to YouTube and look for the Higher Purpose Forum YouTube channel, and you can see recordings of Sun Hyung's very interesting talks on immigration and whether the U.S. is in decline.
Absolutely. If you are on YouTube, definitely click Boston, type in Boston Higher Purpose Forum. And you'll also see the HJI Graduate School YouTube channel, which has video recordings of all the joint ventures between and presentations between the school and Higher Purpose Forum. So with that, thank you all for joining. Really appreciate your active participation today. I don't know if the core team would like to stay on just for a minute, but for everyone else, thank you so much. Have a great evening and a great rest of your week.
Thank you, Sun Hyung. Thank you.
You mean Luke?
Thank you, everyone.
I mean, Luke.
No, thank you to Sun Hyung. Don't rescind that thing.
Very good. Very good.
You're muted.
Just goodbye. I'm sorry I came in really late because there was a lot going on here, so it happens.
I bet.
But,
Yeah.
No worries. No need to
Good,
apologize.
it's good just the fact this is happening, you know. A lot can come
Thanks,
from it.
George. Thanks for coming when you did.
Okay.
Great to see you.
Bye, everybody.
You can hear the whole thing. It'll eventually be posted on our YouTube channel. So
Yeah, I've been waiting for the immigration one. I'm gonna.
It's right here.
Yeah.
In the chat.
Good. Yeah. Oh, okay. Bye-bye. Thank you.
thanks, George. Thanks for coming.
Yeah. What happened?
Well,
There we go.
All right.
it's really awesome. My brother came. Great.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Uncle Jim.
You guys, this means so much. You know how much it means to me, right? Wow.
But I'd still like to hear you explain it.
About how much it means to me?
Yeah.
Well, I have 5 siblings. I'm number 2, and Bruce is number 5.
Oh,
Bruce is a wonderful guy. He's an atheist. But he's an atheist, but he has read the Bible. And he's him and his wife are the only couple in my family who would like ask me questions and are curious. And he came to one of our Higher Purpose Forum meetings on, the unity of science, spirituality, and religion, one by Allison Wakeland. He stayed through the whole thing. And I would say my brother Bruce is extremely talented guy. He's been very successful in everything he's done in his life. He's got a great family.